We have evidence now that Native Americans that were here, not all of them, but by large, they had secret societies that were literally ancient forms of Freemasonry within their Native American tribes. Satanic rituals, blood rituals. We even have evidence of underground kivas, temples, which I'm sure you're familiar with when you get into the whole Four Corners conspiracy. All these things taking place on American soil. But interestingly, we find out that the god who they revered and worshipped, again, not all of them, but by majority, we're dealing with a serpent god, a plumed, feathered serpent god. The same god shows up in Mexico under the name Quetzalcoatl. You go down into Quiché. In Quiché, they called him Gucumatz, and then in Peru, they called him Amaru. Amaru is the root of the word America. Amaruca literally translates over the land of the plumed serpent. Now, when we get into Ephesians and we understand what spiritual warfare looks like, Paul tells us we're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're actually wrestling with principalities. Okay, these are fallen angel entities over nations, over land, over different areas. These are the things that affect what goes on underneath. These are fallen, by the way. These are not good entities. These are the higher entities that are in league with Satan. Now, I believe that the plumed serpent god is literally Satan himself. So when you consider that we are living on a massive land in the Western Hemisphere, that the ancients all prophesied was going to be the land that was going to lead the world into a worldwide global democracy that was going to be a beacon of light, bringing about all the old religions and schools of the world. That really makes more sense now that we understand that our nation has been revering and worshiping Lucifer long before the Native Americans got here. They inherited these things from the giants, the white giants that were here before them, the advanced civilizations. And I'll even say this, Sir Francis Bacon, who I believe Francis Bacon was William Shakespeare. He penned the book, The New Atlantis. He believed that this land called North America, he believed that this was the site of the original Atlantis. He also believed that this land was going to be fulfilling major prophecies according to what he studied in the occult world, going all the way back to ancient Greece. So, interestingly, when you study the writings of the New Atlantis, you're going to find out that America has been fulfilling these prophecies. I mean, it makes perfect sense. So much so that the occultists, such as Manly P. Hall, who was a major theosophist, by the way, he taught that America was going to be that beacon of light in the last days. He said that this nation was literally going to be shining like a light on a hill. That we were going to shine across the world, and we were going to bring about the democratic commonwealth. We were going to bring about the old religions of the world, the superior ancient knowledge, and that we were going to be that nation that was spoken of by all the old mystics and the prophets of old. Now, part of that is also reviving the Egyptian mystery schools. All of these things have been fulfilled, but here's the thing. The secret societies, they have been maintaining the language, the rituals, the esoteric knowledge. They've been maintaining all of this secretly for thousands of years, passing it on. But they've also suffered persecution over the years. That's why they called them secret societies. They had to go into secrecy. They had to hide these things because they didn't want the common man to understand that. What's interesting about this is that the secret societies that rule America, that founded this nation, we believe that was the reason that they came here under the guise of freedom of religion. See, we've been taught that freedom of religion was all about Christians being able to worship freely. Well, this is a Christian nation, we've been told. Founded by Christians, for Christians, by Christians. I can't think of a greater lie, a greater deception upon this nation other than freedom of religion was for us as Christians. Furthermore, we have come to the conclusion that the freedom of religion was a cloak that would allow all the secret societies to come and operate freely here, and even to set up policy. A lot of the policy that we've seen over the years was set with the mindset of protecting the secret societies, allowing them to get where they need to be so that they can operate and they can call down the gods of old.
So the deep state has three different levels. At first, you have the legislative branch and bureaucracy of spreading this ideology out on the world stage. Underneath that, you have the second level, which influences the first level. And so in that level, you have foreign governments. You have occult secret societies, your Skull and Bones, and et cetera. Then you also have your think tanks and all of those and rich globalists that want to see their agenda make it to affect that first level. So that's the second level, and they're all influencing the first level. Underneath that is the spirit realm. So these people that are in the secret societies and occultists and want to see it put out on the first level of the world stage, they're going in there doing these rituals, and we choose Bohemian Grove for that purpose because we don't have enough time to break down every secret society and their purposes and whatever. Ultimately, their goal is all the same. But at Bohemian Grove, it's like where the walls come down. That's where the ritual aspect of things come, and the third level of the deep state. So the third level is tapping into the spirit realm to be able to get your power and to be able to get your direction, and that influences the second level. And that influences the first level, and that's how it goes across the world scene to be enacted. Ultimately, Luciferianism, Satanism, these rituals to tap into the other side to get their direction. This is it's kind of like being a Christian. God gives us certain guidelines in His book. It's our basic instructions before leaving Earth. It's our guidelines to be able to make it here, right? I mean, we're lost without that. And so He gives us certain criteria on how to pray, how to communicate, how to worship. He gave in the Old Testament very specifics about how to build the temple. It's just one example. And so when you're dealing with the occult side of things, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's the occultists they're following just as diligently as a true believer of Christ, follows Him, submits their life to Him, stays in the Word, does lives the Word, right? Just as that diligence is, they're just as diligent, but it's for the opposite side. So with the occult, you've got these practices that have been passed down for millennia. And these people that are in power today are still practicing the same things. They're still wanting to see this system come in so that they can have their final go at taking over this world, destroying Christianity. Ultimately, it's not against us. I mean, yes, it is against humanity, but ultimately it's against God.
People say, well, what about George Washington? Because he's touted as such a man of integrity. Matter of fact, there's records that he attended church regularly, a Christian church. There's also records that he and his pastor, there's letters that have been written. Matter of fact, Library of Congress is a prime field to be picking truthful pieces of fruit. You want to get fruitful research? Hey, go to the Library of Congress. What we find out is that the pastor, one of Washington's pastors, he said that overall he spoke with Washington time and time again that Washington was a deist. Okay, Washington didn't want to have a problem with the guy. He wanted to continue going to the church because it was a political move. But in reality, Washington said he was a deist. They went back and forth on this matter. This has been documented historically. He was not a Christian. He was definitely a deist. Now, others will argue that Washington renounced the Masonic Lodge. Well, that's only a half-truth. Okay, he renounced the British Lodge. See, when he came over and started setting things up, like in this new era, if you will, he had to renounce the old to become part of the new. And so he was actually part of the Alexandrian Lodge. I forget the exact number of the lodge, but if you Google this, you're going to find out exactly which lodge Washington was a part of in Virginia. I think it might have been Lodge 122, but I forget. I don't want to quote that, but he renounced the British, joined on with the current lodge that was setting up in the New World. They were two separate systems. Now, they were very similar, but they were separate. Matter of fact, their idea was to come and set up a government here that was almost identical to the oligarchy that they left. See, most people don't realize that. They don't realize that Washington was part of a grand conspiracy to create basically a new oligarchy here, a government controlled by a few. And that's all historical. We document that in our film. But the idea was to set that up, but to give more freedoms. But it still allowed the elite to run everything that the government wants. Any move of the government, the elite were going to be involved. They were not going to allow the common man to make decisions. Matter of fact, when the Constitution and some of the founding documents were signed, those windows were locked. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon, he came on record and he talked to us about this for the film. He points to the fact that the founding fathers were a deep state, which we would call shadow government. Back to Washington. Washington was definitely a Freemason. Matter of fact, they cast sprigs of acacia at his Masonic funeral to signify him going on to the land of Osiris in the underworld. Now, they believed Osiris was already in the underworld, and they believed that Washington was the America's first Osiris, but he wasn't meant to be the final. He was meant to be a type. And we see that in how they went down and went through this funeral. As a matter of fact, if you go back and study the death and the funerals of Washington, you're going to find out that there were two. You had two different eulogies. You want to look for the Masonic eulogy that was presented by Timothy Bigelow Jr. That literally paints the picture. Look, Washington was not just a porch mason, okay? He knew what he was doing. He knew he was very much invested in this. We have evidence that not only was he a mason, but he was a mason in good standing all the way up until his death. A lot of people say he renounced the lodge. Again, he did, but it was the British lodge, not the American lodge. What's crazy about this is that he was literally being set up in a system that was a religious system that was set up to bring about the spirit of Osiris, a resurrected spirit, a reincarnated spirit, if you will, of Osiris, to possess the ruler of this nation. Washington never made it to the crypt. They did not put him in the crypt that they built for him because we believe they didn't build it for him. They said they did. But it's kind of like the government says that they're building, these military bases, and then immediately they retire the military base after they build it because they had other plans for it. The government does this all the time. They set up the crypt of Washington. They installed it very much strategically, which we break down all the strategy involved here. The crypt of Washington is sitting at the basement level of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. This is literally a page out of ancient Egyptian magic. We break this down step by step by step in the film. We show everything, how you go up and you walk into the Capitol building. You look up and what do you see in the dome? You see this thing called the apotheosis of George Washington. Now, if you really was a Christian, like so many people say, all you gotta do is look up and see the heaven that George Washington is ascending into, which is painted on this massive mural, and he's surrounded by all the pagan gods. You say, well, why on earth, if Washington was a Christian, why would he be getting deified in the first place into a god? That's what the word apotheosis means. Literally, Washington becoming a god. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, said that George Washington was becoming the Osiris. Now, pagan gods, what does this have to do with DC? Well, Thomas Jefferson literally designed the city to honor the old pantheon of pagan gods. This is on record at the Library of Congress. People can investigate what's called the most approved plan. They literally built this city to pull a line from the Ghostbusters, how they talk about drawing down the power on these certain buildings, cursed buildings, buildings that are set up for drawing down occult power. The city of DC literally was built as a massive ritualistic chessboard to do public rituals en masse. So the Washington Monument, people like to go and look at it. Everybody wants to see it, but they don't understand the history of it. But just the measurements alone should be enough to raise some questions. It's 555 feet tall above ground, and the physics involved, in order to keep it from falling over, you have 111 feet inside the earth. So you're ending up with a totality of 666 feet total from tip to base inside the earth. But what's crazy about this is that in the base of it, they have inculcated the magic Apollonian square. Now, they believe that this square has a binding factor to it, that it can bind certain things. Some people call it a 666 square. We do a full breakdown of this in the film. And the 666 square, basically what you end up with is that no matter how you add up the numbers in any of the lines, you end up with 111, with a total number of 666. So what's crazy is that they believe it's a binding utility, but it also goes back to some prophecies about the resurrection of Apollo. Now, the same entity that we would call Apollo, others call Osiris. So there's a connection there. Apollo and Osiris are the same entity. It's just from two different parts of the world. People can go back and look into the Sibylline prophecies. They can understand that this is a very real connection. The Masonic Lodge has that same 666 square in the skylight of their ritual chamber, which we show in the film, surrounded by the 33rd degree Freemasonic emblems of ISIS. And what's crazy is that directly beneath that 666 square, you have their altar with the holy books, including the Bible. They believe that by putting the Bible underneath the square, that it's binding the power and influence of the Word of God. But it doesn't stop there. There's a secret Bible bound in the testes of the Washington Monument. This Bible was what Dan Brown called the lost symbol. See, people have no idea how these books and this pop culture, such as Dan Brown and others, how they're conditioning us to what's really going on. They're pre-programming us to accept these things. The Dan Brown lost symbol was a Bible, a Masonic Bible, that's bound in the testes of the Washington Monument beneath a 12-foot mini obelisk. Most people don't even know about the 12-foot mini obelisk. We were able to get photos from when they did some renovation work over there. Matter of fact, Atlas Obscura got their hands on the photos, and that's where we first heard about the 12-foot obelisk. No one else knew about it. If you look down at the base of the main obelisk, you have what looks like a sewage hole. A manhole with a metal cover. You pull that thing up, which you can't, but they did, and we got footage of all of this. They pulled it up, and sure enough, you've got a 12-foot mini obelisk. 12 is a mockery of the number of disciples of Jesus Christ. It's also in the occult world. That's the number of the perfect government that they believe is going to be set up in the Novus Ordo Seclorum. Now, what is the Novus Ordo Seclorum? That is Latin for the new order of the ages. Anybody that carries around a dollar bill in their pocket, pull it out, you'll see the pyramid, you'll see the Novus Ordo Seclorum. That was what this was all about. The founders of this nation knew that this was the land prophesied by the old mystics. They wanted to resurrect their old gods right here on this land, and they knew for a fact that this would be the continent that was going to lead the world in this Novus Ordo Seclorum. I definitely believe that rituals are utilized utilized to obtain technology. We do a whole breakdown in our film Hollowworth Chronicles about how the Nazis had this secret group of women known as the Vril Maidens, and they would embark on seances, and in those seances they would begin to automatic write, and they would get information in other languages. Matter of fact, the blueprints given to the Nazis did not for the bell. The Nazis had this craft called the bell, or the Die Glocke. That information did not just get given to one person. It actually got given in two separate events in two separate languages. It was years later that they decoded those languages and realized it was all one document, and it was the blueprints for what they believed to be some type of a time machine UFO. Some believe it was a time machine, some believe it was just a flying craft. But yeah, I believe the technology is oftentimes given through satanic rituals and seances. But what I see more is the power and the atmospheric shifts that are taking place through these rituals that are changing the course of the direction of America.
Bohemian Grove has the massive ritual that takes place out there on a yearly basis. And this was blown open by Alex Jones. I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen the Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove. We use a little clip documenting his interview with David Gergen. We chose the David Gergen Street interview to validate, to show that Bohemian Grove is real, to show the secrecy involved in the participants that are members there, and also to show that the ritual is in fact true, that people participate in this. And this is precedents from times past. This is going back to late 1800s, early 1900s. We have in the film we have a whole bunch of images, of pictures that were photographs that were taken, and it shows this this ritual and the different things and practices that took place out there. But to go back to your question about the rituals, the big one that they do there on a yearly basis is the cremation of care. And there's a big giant stone owl out there. And it's very, the only way I can describe it is that it's a high place. It's equivalent to a high place of the Old Testament. It's literally, you're in the groves, you've got your altar set up, sacrifices being done there. And I'm not here to say if it's mock sacrifice or if it's real. I personally believe that it would be real if you're getting the leaders of the world to come out on a yearly basis to go there and to participate in this. I would think that it would be real. Also because of, with it being truly satanic and Luciferian and fulfilling those esoteric belief systems, it would only make sense. Blood is required in high-level rituals to be able to engage the other side. So it would only make sense that they're truly doing rituals out there. But that's the reason we went to Bohemian Grove in the film, is not physically, but why we covered that topic is just because that's it's an encompassing of your secret societies, your occult systems, but it also shows that the higher ups, the people that are making policy, not just in America, but for the world, they meet out there and they do these things.
There's a very strange ritual that dates back to ancient Egypt, known as the Osiris Rising, or the Rising of Osiris ritual. You'll see it listed in different names on the internet, probably. Osiris, he had a conspirator named Set, and Set wanted to do away with Osiris. So he had him cut up into 14 pieces. Now his body's cut up into 14 pieces. It gets thrown into the Nile River. And Isis, of course, isn't happy about this. Isis tries to collect all the pieces up, and she's only able to find 13 pieces. So she fashions together those 13 pieces to form a more perfect union, which is the framework of our 13 colonies, a more perfect union, based off of the myth of Osiris. Now that's showing Egyptian magic even in the framework and the fabric of our foundation, right? It's not an accident that they brought together 13 colonies to form a more perfect union. That was all by design. It was all manufactured. But what's crazy is that she fashions together these 13 pieces, but guess what piece is missing? His genitals. So what do? They set up this ritual. That's what the obelisk is, by the way. The obelisk represents the 14th piece that they couldn't find. It is literally a phallic symbol. You find it in the Vatican, you find it in ancient Egypt, you find it here in the States, you find it all over cemeteries, you find it all over the Masonic lodges. It represents the male sex organ of Osiris. And they believe, by setting up this ritual, now it's all a recreation of the original ritual that took place between Isis and the 13 pieces of Osiris, which we break down the full ritual in the film. Tom Horn breaks it down right there in the mall area of DC, right between the Washington Monument and the Dome of Isis, which is the Capitol building. Now, this is fascinating because the original ritual had to take place between, in a courtyard, between a dome and an obelisk. Putting those two together like that creates a power generator, literally a generator for this ritual. And the idea is that the seed of Osiris, the seed, is going to come up and emit out of the phallic symbol, which is the Washington Monument, and it's going to take over whoever our president is. Now, this sounds crazy, but think about this. In ancient Egypt, what had happened was that the pharaoh would go through this ritual, he would enter in a man, and he would exit the ritual a god. That was their belief. And they believed that their pharaoh was literally the embodiment of Osiris because of that ritual. They were calling him up out of the underworld. So what we have in America is the same ritual, basically, that the Freemasons believe that they have maintained the proper language and the ritual to a T from the ancient world. They claim to have this still today. At the inauguration of every U.S. president, the president is up there, right there between the dome and the obelisk, right there in that power generator, and right around the corner at the Herodome, which is what they call the Masonic Mecca of the world, literally. The Herodome is this temple, this massive, crazy temple in D.C. They are up there beneath that magic square we were talking about, that magic 666 square, binding the influence and the power of the Word of God. They believe they're binding the power of the Bible while they do this ritual, and they are literally doing the raising of Osiris ritual while the presidential inauguration happens at every election. And they are literally calling on the spirit of Osiris to raise up, or Apollo, however you want to slice it, to come out of the underworld and to possess the president. So the president-elect walks into this ritual a man, exits the ritual a god. This is what the Freemasons believe. Now, people are going to say, well, not every president's a Freemason. Well, most of them have ties to secret societies, but they're not all conscious of the ritual. Doesn't matter. This ritual takes place every inauguration. The Freemasons hold to this. Here's one thing I want to point out about this. The ritual that takes place there, it's been going on now since the beginning, to our knowledge, since the beginning of this nation being set up. They believe that it's going to stick eventually. See, they don't know which president is going to be the final Osiris. Now, they believed in the foundation of this nation that Washington was a type. He was the first Osiris. Technically, every president in their eyes is an Osiris. But the crazy thing is that not every time the ritual is going to stick. They have to keep doing it until it actually sticks, and they get that one that they've been waiting for. This is kind of like when we talk about Babylon working. You know, how many years, was Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard working in the desert trying to get this ritual to stick? They do this at the inauguration of every U.S. president because they believe there's going to come a time in a president that will be the one. He will be the one, and they will go through this ritual when his body lies in state in the Capitol Dome. I believe they're going to do this ritual, and that final raising ritual, that's going to be the one that's going to stick. I don't believe it's going to stick when they're doing it at an inauguration. The real one's going to take place when this Antichrist man dies. They lay him in state in the Capitol building beneath the 72 pentagrams and the apotheosis of George Washington. And that's not it. There's so much more numerology about the Capitol building and the 13 statues and the statutory hall. But I believe that's the real ritual. That's the one where he's going to raise, where the spirit of Osiris, which the Bible talks about this Apollyon coming up from the bottomless pit.
When you visit DC, it feels like you're walking through Rome with all the architecture and all the pagan idols and the statues, the monuments, even down to, and Justin mentioned this about the Roman Pantheon being recreated and shepherded by Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wanted to see reconstructed pagan temples to the old gods. He wanted that to be what you see. That's when you're walking down DC, this is what you're going to see, and he was successful in that. Being raised to think that America was built as a Christian nation, you would expect to see crosses. You would expect to see statues of apostles. I don't know. That's just what I have in my mind. If you're going to go, you're going to see some representation of that, and you don't see any of that there. Like, it really feels like you're walking in Rome, because you've got all of the structures that are there and the statues of the deities and what have you. And so with DC, it was set up specifically for that purpose, to be to pay homage to these pagan gods and goddesses. That should be a red flag for many people. But to look at the structure of it, the way that they set up things on purpose, you can look at it, and everybody knows about the pentagrams. And a lot of people will look down and say, even with the pentagram that's on the street layout, they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, well, it's not a complete pentagram because it's missing a leg. Well, if you do any research on that, you'll actually find out that that's even a more powerful pentagram in the occult than a completed one is. So with that set up there, with the whole the layout of the streets and the roads and the buildings being charged, being set up for the pagan gods and goddesses, it's done for a specific purpose, to be able to harness power and give direction. The purpose behind it is actually for rituals, for ritual purposes, to be able to harness the power of Osiris, for example, as we talked about with the inauguration of every U.S. president, and calling down that, or calling up the seat of Osiris to allow the government to have a divine representation. And that goes all the way back to the Pharaoh in Egypt.
Interesting. I had somebody send me a video of lightning striking the Washington Monument just here recently. It was a big deal. I don't think it did any damage. I don't know. I didn't really look into it. But the video that I saw, and I suggest somebody, everybody look into this. Look at the video of the recent Washington Monument getting struck by lightning. That's what they're calling it, by the way. All I could think about was, this looks like a massive ritual is happening right now. Like, this doesn't just look like lightning striking something. This looks like some Ghostbusters satanic ritual taking place, drawing down the power. I'm not saying that's what was going on, but that's the first thing that crossed my mind as I saw this video footage. So I think that it's possible that, everything going on right now, we're really starting to reevaluate